Hello, and today's learning target is I can solve a complex equation with absolute value. Let's take a look at the first example. Our first example says 2 times the absolute value of x minus 3 equals 8. With absolute value, we always have two cases. However, we can't write our two cases until we isolate the absolute value. So we must get rid of this 2 that's being multiplied in front of the absolute value of x minus 3. So in order to undo the multiplication of 2, we're going to divide by 2 to both sides. And when I do that, I get the absolute value of x minus 3 equals 4. So my two cases are as follows. The first case is exactly as you see it, and we drop the absolute value symbol. The second case is the opposite sign of positive 4, which would be negative 4 here. And now we'll solve both equations. So I'll add 3 to both sides and get x equals 7. And the same thing with this equation, I'll add 3 and get x equals negative 1. So my two solutions, and again I get two solutions with absolute value, is 7 and negative 1. But it's always good to double check our answer. So if I plug 7 back in, I have 2 times the absolute value of 7 minus 3, and that had better equal 8. Well, 7 minus 3 is 4, and the absolute value of 4 is 4. And 2 times 4 is 8, so we know we're correct. If I check the other one, the other answer, negative 1, I have 2 times the absolute value of negative 1 minus 3, and that had better equal 8, and negative 1 minus 3 here is negative 4, and the absolute value of negative 4 is really just positive 4, so 2 times positive 4 is equal to 8, so we know that we're correct, and 7 and negative 1 are our two solutions. Let's take a look at the second example. Before I can write my two cases of absolute value here, I need to isolate the absolute value and divide by the negative 3 that's being multiplied by it. So when I divide by negative 3, I get the absolute value of x minus 4 equals positive 4. So my two cases are x minus 4 equals 4, and my second case is x minus 4 equals negative 4. So I'm going to solve both equations, and I'll add 4 here, and I get x equals 8, and then here I'll add 4, and negative 4 plus 4 is 0, so my two solutions I get are 8 and 0. But let's check and make sure that they're right. So I get here negative 3 times the absolute value of 8 minus 4, that had better equal negative 12, and 8 minus 4 is 4, and the absolute value of 4 is 4, and negative 3 times 4 is negative 12. Now if I check 0, negative 3 times the absolute value of 0 minus 4 equals negative 12. 0 minus 4 is negative 4, but the absolute value of that is positive 4, times negative 3 does equal negative 12. So we are correct when we have our two solutions of 8 and 0. Okay, let's continue with another example. I have a lot I need to do here to isolate the absolute value. So the first of which, I am going to add 8 to both sides. And when I do that, I get 5 times the absolute value of x plus 2 equals 15. And again, I need to continue to isolate that absolute value. So I'll divide by 5 and get the absolute value of x plus 2 equals 3. So now the two cases I can set up are x plus 2 equals 3, and then the second case is x plus 2 equals negative 3. And I'll solve both of these equations and get x equals 1, and then here I get x equals negative 5. So my two solutions are 1 and negative 5. But I'm going to check my work, probably before I circle my answer. And so when I plug them back in, I'll plug in 1. 1, if I plug in 1 here, 1 plus 2 is 3. 5 times the absolute value of 3 is just 3. So 5 times 3 is 15, minus 8 does equal 7. If I try the next example, if I plug in negative 5 here, negative 5 plus 2 is negative 3, but the absolute value of negative 3 is 3. So again, I get 5 times 3 is 15 minus 8 equals 7. So we know that we're correct when we get 1 and negative 5. All right, let's cruise right along. And again, let's isolate the absolute value. So practicing, inverse operations here. So I'm going to first add 5 to both sides. And when I do that, I get negative 2 times the absolute value of x plus 8 equals negative 7 plus 5 is negative 2. And now I'll have to undo a negative 2 being multiplied by the absolute value here, so I'll divide. And I'm left with x plus 8. The absolute value of that equals 1. So my two cases are as I see it, x plus 8 equals 1, and I drop the absolute value symbols, and x plus 8 equals negative 1. Now I will solve both equations, and I get x equals negative 7, and I get x equals negative 9. So my two solutions here that I get are x equals negative 7 and negative 9. But let's double check our answers here. So I'm going to plug in negative 7, and negative 7 plus 8 is 1. The absolute value of 1 is 1. So negative 2 times 1 minus 5. So negative 2 times 1 is negative 2. Minus 5 does equal negative 7. So we're good to go on that one. And now if I check the next answer, negative 9. So if I plug in negative 9 plus 8 is negative 1. The absolute value of negative 1 is positive 1 again. So I'm going to get the same answer if I plug in the same thing, but just to check it. Negative 2 times 1 is negative 2, minus 5 does equal negative 7. So my two solutions of negative 7 and negative 9 are correct. Okay, let's continue on with the back side of the notes here. Okay, let's continue with the 3 times the absolute value of 2x minus 6 plus 8 equals 27, and let's isolate this absolute value. So I'm going to subtract 9 from both sides and get 3 times the absolute value of 2x minus 6 equals 27 minus 9 is 18. Divide by 3 on both sides, and I get the absolute value of 2x minus 6 equals 6. Now I can set up my two cases. One is as I see it, drop the absolute value signs, and the second is I have to flip the 6 to a negative 6 on the right-hand side. And now I'll solve. So I'll add 6 to both sides and get 2x equals 12. Divide by 2, so x equals 6 there. And over here I will add 6 to both sides, so 2x equals 0. And any number divided by 0 divided by any number is just 0. So my two solutions that I end up getting here are 6 and 0 in brackets. And let's double check our answer. So I'm going to plug in 6 right here for x, and 2 times 6 is 12. 12 minus 6 is 6, and the absolute value of 6 is 6. So 3 times 6 plus 9 should equal 27, and it does. 18 plus 9 is 27. And then if I plug in 0 right here, 2 times 0 is 0, minus 6 is negative 6. The absolute value of 6 is 6. So I'll just, redo this right here, and I will get my answer to work out. So my two solutions are 6 and 0. Okay, let's move on to our last example here. And there is a typo in these notes, so if you could please change the negative 4 here to a plus 4. And now we'll solve this equation. So again, please change that negative 4 to a plus 4. And now let's isolate the absolute value. So I'll subtract 4 first and get 5 times the absolute value of 2x plus 8 equals 10. Divide by 5. So the absolute value of 2x plus 8 equals 2, and I'll write my two cases. The first is as I see it, dropping the absolute value symbols, and the second case is 2x plus 8 equals negative 2. Now I'll go ahead and solve both of these equations. Subtract 2 right away, and 2x equals negative 6. divide by 2, so x equals negative 3 for the first example, or the first equation I should say. Then I'll subtract 8 over here, and 2x equals negative 10, so x equals negative 5 for the second equation. So my two solutions are x equals, let's fix that writing, so x equals, the first one is negative 3 and the second answer is negative 5. And let's double check our work. So I'm going to plug in negative 3 here. And 2 times negative 3 is negative 6 plus 8. The absolute value of that, and that's negative 6 plus 8 is 2, and the absolute value of 2 is 2. So 5 times 2 plus 4 does equal 14. So we're good to go on that one. And the other one I'll plug in is negative 5. And 2 times negative 5 here is negative 10 plus 8. The absolute value of that, and negative 10 plus 8 is negative 2. The absolute value of negative 2 is 2, so we would be redoing this problem right here by plugging in 2, and so we know that we're right when we got negative 3 and negative 5. And again, don't forget on that example that we changed that negative 4 to a positive 4, so there was a typo there. So for a summary, the first thing that we want to look at here is isolate the absolute value using inverse operations. Split the equation into two equations. And solve each equation. And then don't forget to check your work. Thanks for listening. Have a great day. Bye.